Sometimes the people who need help most are the ones everyone else ignores. On a dusty frontier trail, an elderly woman lay collapsed beside her broken wagon, watching rider after rider pass her by without stopping. Calder Boone was a mountain man who'd spent years minding his own business. He had every reason to keep riding. But when he saw the bruises on her wrists and the fear in her eyes, he couldn't. She begged him for one thing: "Take me to town before dark." He agreed, thinking it was just a simple act of kindness. He was wrong. This woman carried a secret that powerful men would kill for, and the closer they got to town, the more danger found them. What truth could she possibly hold that was worth dying for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other in the high country. Calder Boone woke before dawn in his small cabin, nestled between two peaks, where the pine trees grew thick enough to block out most of the world below. He'd built the place himself 7 years ago, after he'd left everything behind. The cabin was rough but solid, just like the life he'd carved out here. Simple, quiet, alone. Rex, his trail dog, was already awake, sitting by the door with that patient look he always had. The dog was some mix of shepherd and hound, with a grey muzzle that matched Calder's own beard. They'd found each other about 5 years back, both of them wandering, both of them done with whatever they'd left behind. Rex had proven to be better company than most men Calder had known. Calder pulled on his worn boots and stepped outside. The air was cold and clean, the kind that made your lungs work for it. He could see his breath in the dim light. Below, somewhere far down the mountain, was the frontier towns, people, all that noise and complication. Up here, there was only the wind, the trees, and the occasional elk. He went about his routine with the ease of long practice. Water from the creek, coffee boiled over a small fire, a bit of dried meat for him and Rex. He checked his traps, finding nothing. That was fine. He had enough supplies to last another few weeks before he'd need to make the long ride down to the trading post. He preferred it that way. Fewer trips meant fewer people. Calder hadn't always been a hermit. There was a time when he'd worn a badge, when he'd believed in law and order and the notion that good men could make a difference. He'd been a U.S. Marshal, one of the best, if he could say so without sounding proud. He'd tracked outlaws across 3 territories, brought them in alive when he could, dead when he couldn't. People had respected him. Some had even called him a hero. That felt like another lifetime now. His wife, Sarah, had believed in him. She'd believed in the work he did, even when it took him away for weeks at a time, even when it put her in danger. He'd promised her he'd always come home. He'd kept that promise right up until the day he couldn't protect her from the consequences of his own righteous pursuits. The man who killed her was named Jack Torrance, a cattle rustler and murderer who'd escaped justice because a corrupt judge had ties to his family. Calder had brought Torrance in twice. Twice the judge let him walk. The third time, Torrance didn't bother running. He came for Calder directly, but Calder wasn't home. Sarah was. After the funeral, Calder had tracked Torrance down. He'd found him in a saloon, drunk and laughing about it. Calder had nearly killed him with his bare hands. Would have, if other marshals hadn't pulled him off. They understood, but the law was the law. Calder had crossed a line. He could face charges himself, or he could disappear. He chose the mountains. Now, 7 years later, the rage had cooled into something else. Not forgiveness. He'd never forgive himself for failing Sarah. But acceptance? Maybe. Or at least the kind of numbness that passed for peace when you'd run out of other options. He finished his coffee and decided to check the lower trails. Sometimes deer came through, and he could use the meat. Rex trotted ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging slightly. The dog didn't ask questions or expect explanations. That was the thing Calder appreciated most. The trail down was steep and rocky, winding through stands of aspen and pine. Calder knew every turn, every loose stone. He'd walked it 1,000 times. His horse, a sturdy roan mare named Slate, was pastured in a small meadow near the base of his property. He whistled, and she came, already saddled from yesterday. He rarely unsaddled her unless he was planning to stay put for more than a day. Out here, you had to be ready to move. He rode slowly, in no particular hurry. The sun was climbing now, warming the air just enough to take the bite out of it. Rex ranged ahead, disappearing into the brush and reappearing a few minutes later, tongue-lolling, happy as any creature had a right to be. The main trail, the one that connected the scattered settlements and trading posts of the territory, ran about 5 miles from Calder's cabin. He rarely went near it. Too many people passed through, and people meant complications. But today, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he found himself drifting in that direction. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe it was just a change in routine. When he finally reached the ridge overlooking the trail, he stopped. Rex sat beside him, ears perked. Below, the dirt road stretched out in both directions, empty except for the heat shimmer that made the distance waver like water. And then he saw it. A wagon, stopped at an awkward angle. One of the wheels was broken, canted sideways in a way that meant it wasn't going anywhere without serious repair. A woman sat beside it, her back against the wheel, her head down. Even from this distance, Calder, I could see she wasn't young. Her dress was dark and plain, her hair grey and pulled back. She wasn't moving much. As he watched, a rider came down the trail from the east. The man slowed, looked at the woman, then kept going without stopping. A few minutes later, another rider did the same. Then a small wagon, a family by the looks of it. They didn't even slow down. Calder felt something stir in his chest. Irritation, maybe. Or recognition. He knew what it was, to be left behind, to be invisible to people who had places to be, and no time for strangers. He should ride away. It wasn't his problem. The woman would figure something out, or she wouldn't. That was the way of the frontier. Hard country made hard choices, and sentiment got people killed. But he didn't ride away. Instead, he guided Slate down the slope, Rex following close. The descent took a few minutes, and by the time he reached the trail, the woman had looked up. Her face was weathered, lined with years of sun and work, but her eyes were sharp, alert, and frightened. Calder reined in a few feet away. Up close, he could see more. The bruises on her wrists, dark purple against pale skin. The way she held herself, like someone who'd been hurt and expected more hurt to come. The broken wagon wasn't an accident of travel. Someone had smashed that wheel deliberately. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't talk much these days. She looked up at him, and for a moment she didn't speak. She was sizing him up, deciding if he was another threat or something else. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was steadier than he expected. "Please," she said, "take me to town." It was a simple request, the kind a decent person couldn't refuse without feeling the weight of it. But Calder wasn't sure he was a decent person anymore. He'd given that up when he left the badge behind. Still, he found himself dismounting. "How far?" he asked. "Clarkston," she said. 15 miles west," he nodded. 15 miles wasn't far, but it would take most of the day at a careful pace, especially with an injured woman. And there was something else. Something in the way she kept glancing down the trail, like she expected someone to appear any moment. "Someone chasing you?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Who?" "Men who want me dead," she said simply. Calder looked at her for a long moment. He should walk away. This wasn't his fight. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet determination that reminded him of Sarah. His wife had been like that, soft-spoken but steel underneath. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded. He helped her to her feet. She winced but didn't complain. He could see she was in pain, probably more than she was letting on. He got her up onto Slate, settling her as comfortably as he could. The mare shifted slightly but accepted the extra weight. Calder took the reins and started walking. Rex fell into step beside him, occasionally glancing back at the 18-woman, as if he too sensed something important was happening. They walked in silence for a while. The sun was higher now, warming the trail. Behind them, the broken wagon sat abandoned, a marker of where one journey ended and another began. Calder didn't know it yet, but the decision to stop to help this woman would change everything. By nightfall, he'd be running for his life. By tomorrow, he'd be facing the most powerful men in the territory, and somewhere in the days to come, he'd have to decide if redemption was something a man could earn, or if some sins were too deep to ever wash away. For now, though, he just walked, leading a horse and a frightened woman toward a town he'd never seen, for reasons he couldn't quite name. Sometimes, that's how the most important things begin. Not with grand gestures or clear purpose, but with one small choice to stop when everyone else keeps riding. They'd been walking for about an hour when the woman finally spoke again. "My name is Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Pritchard." Calder glanced back at her. She sat straight in the saddle despite her obvious exhaustion, hands gripping the pommel. There was something refined about her, even in her current state. The way she spoke, the way she held herself. She wasn't a common settler's wife. "Calder Boone," he replied. "You live up in the mountains?" "I do." "Alone?" "Mostly." He gestured to Rex, who was sniffing along the edge of the trail. "Got him for company." Eleanor nodded, and for a few minutes there was only the sound of Slate's hooves on the packed dirt and the wind moving through the scrub grass that lined the trail. The terrain here was open, rolling hills dotted with sage and the occasional twisted juniper. In the distance, mountains rose like dark teeth against the sky. "I'm grateful you stopped," Eleanor said finally. "Others didn't. Notice that. They have their reasons, I suppose. No one wants trouble out here." Calder didn't respond. He knew all about avoiding trouble. It was why he'd spent 7 years on a mountain. "Mr. Boone," she said, her voice quieter now, "I need you to understand something. The men who are looking for me, they're not ordinary men. They're dangerous, and they won't stop until they find me." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Why are they after you?" Eleanor's hand went to her chest, clutching at something beneath her dress. After a moment, she pulled out a small locket on a thin chain. It was tarnished silver, and when Calder looked closer, he could see dark stains on it. "Blood, because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see," she said, "and because I took something they want back. What did you see?" She looked down the trail behind them, as if the words themselves might summon her pursuers. "Murder. I saw them murder a man in cold blood. And then I saw them forge documents to steal his land." Calder felt his jaw tighten. Land fraud was common enough on the frontier. So was murder. But there was something in the way Eleanor spoke that told him this was bigger than a simple claim dispute. "Who are they?" he asked. "The Garrison family," she said. "Luther and Cole Garrison. They control most of the territory around Clarkston. They've been stealing land for years, forcing families out, killing anyone who resists. I worked in their household. I saw the documents. I heard them planning. Calder knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew about the Garrisons. They owned the largest ranch, controlled the water rights, and had enough hired guns to make them untouchable. Even when he'd been a marshal, men like the Garrisons had been the ones who made the law meaningless. They bought judges, intimidated witnesses, and buried their crimes under layers of money and violence. "If you worked for them, why would they want you dead?" he asked. "You're just a servant." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Because I'm not just a servant, Mr. Boone. I'm a witness, and I have proof." Before Calder could ask what kind of proof, Rex started barking. The dog stood rigid, staring back down the trail, his hackles raised. Calder's instincts kicked in immediately. He grabbed Slate's reins and pulled the horse off the trail, heading for a cluster of rocks about 50 yards to the north. Eleanor held on, her face pale but determined. They reached cover just as Calder saw it, a dust cloud rising in the distance. Multiple riders, coming fast. "Get down," he said, helping Eleanor off the horse. She stumbled, her legs shaky, but she didn't complain. He positioned her behind the largest rock and crouched beside her, one hand on his rifle. Rex pressed close, silent now but tense. The riders came into view a few minutes later. 5 of them, hard-looking men with guns on their hips and rifles in their saddle scabbards. They rode with the easy confidence of people who expected no resistance. When they reached the spot where Calder had left the trail, they slowed. One of them, a tall man with a black hat and a scar across his cheek, dismounted and studied the ground. He was tracking them. Calder cursed silently. He should have been more careful, should have covered their tracks. But he'd been focused on getting Eleanor away from the exposed trail, not on concealing their path. The scarred man pointed toward the rocks. The others dismounted, spreading out in a loose line. They were professionals, Calder realized, not just ranch hands or drifters. These were hired guns. "Mrs. Pritchard," the scarred man called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "We know you're here. Mr. Garrison just wants to talk. No one needs to get hurt." Eleanor's hand found Calder's arm, gripping tight. He could feel her trembling. "We can wait you out," the man continued, "or you can come peaceful. Either way, you're coming back." Calder measured the distance. About 40 yards. 5 men against 1, with an injured woman and a dog. Not good odds. He was a decent shot, but he hadn't fired a weapon in anger for years. Still, he'd rather fight than hand Eleanor over to men who clearly intended to kill her. He raised his rifle slowly, sighting down the barrel. If it came to it, he'd take the scarred man first. The others would scatter, and in the confusion, maybe Eleanor could run. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. "Think carefully, friend," the scarred man said, and Calder realized the man had seen him. "You don't want to die for someone you don't even know." "Neither do you," Calder called back. The scarred man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Fair point. But there's 5 of us and 1 of you. Math's not in your favor." "Then come take her," Calder said. For a moment, no one moved. The tension stretched taut, like a wire about to snap. Then one of the other men, younger and more nervous than the rest, started forward. Calder shifted his aim, and the young man stopped. "Hold on now," the scarred man said, raising a hand. He was looking at Calder more carefully now, reassessing. "You got the look of a man who's been in this kind of spot before. Military, law?" Calder didn't answer. "I'm going to guess law," the man continued, "which means you know how this ends. We got orders, and we're going to follow them. But I'm a reasonable man. You walk away now, we'll forget we saw you. This doesn't have to be your fight." "Already is," Calder said. The scarred man sighed. "Shame." "Well, we tried." He turned to his men. "Spread out, flank them from both sides. Don't kill the woman." But the man's fair game. The men began to move, circling wide to get around the rocks. Calder glanced at Eleanor. Her face was set, resolved. She knew what was coming. "Can you run?" he asked quietly. "Not far. Then stay low and move when I tell you." He didn't wait for her response. He fired, not at the men but at the ground near their horses. The animals spooked, rearing and scattering. 2 of the men ran after them, cursing. That left 3. Calder fired twice more. Both shots deliberate misses, but close enough to make the men dive for cover. Then he grabbed Eleanor's arm. "Now, move." They ran, or rather Calder ran, and Eleanor did her best to keep up, one hand pressed to her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Rex bounded ahead, leading them toward a dry wash that cut through the hills. Behind them, shots rang out, bullets kicking up dirt. They slid down into the wash, the steep sides offering momentary protection. Calder's mind raced. The wash ran west for maybe a mile before it opened onto flatter ground. If they could reach it, they might lose their pursuers in the broken terrain. But Eleanor was already struggling, her face grey with exhaustion. "I can't," she gasped, leaning against the rocky wall. "I can't keep going." "You have to," Calder said, more roughly than he intended. "They'll kill you if they catch you." "They'll kill you too," she said, "and it will be my fault. Let me worry about that." He heard voices above, the men coordinating their search. They'd be down in the wash within minutes. Calder looked around desperately, searching for an option he didn't have. Then he saw it, a narrow cleft in the rock face, barely wide enough for a person. It was a long shot, but it might work. "In there," he said, pointing. Eleanor looked doubtful but didn't argue. She squeezed into the cleft, and Calder pushed in behind her, pulling Rex with him. The space was tight, the rock pressing in from both sides, but it was deep enough that they were hidden from view, as long as no one looked too carefully. They waited in the darkness, breathing as quietly as they could, Calder's heart hammered in his chest, his rifle ready. Footsteps approached, boots crunching on stone. The scarred man's voice echoed off the walls. "They're in here somewhere. Spread out and check every crack." Eleanor's hand found Calder's in the darkness, squeezing hard. He squeezed back, a silent promise that he wouldn't let them take her. A shadow fell across the entrance to their hiding spot. One of the men, close enough that Calder could hear him breathing. The man paused, looking around, his hand on his gun. For an endless moment Calder thought they'd been discovered. Then Rex growled, low and menacing. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing in the narrow space. The man stepped back, suddenly uncertain. "Nothing here but rats," he called out. "Let's keep moving." The footsteps faded. Calder let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. They waited another 10 minutes, long enough for the men to move on, before carefully emerging from their hiding spot. "They'll come back," Eleanor said quietly. "They won't give up." "I know," Calder said, "which means we can't go to Clarkston. Not directly. They'll be watching the roads." "Then where?" "There's an old mining camp about 10 miles north, abandoned for years. We can hole up there, rest, and figure out what to do next." Eleanor nodded, exhausted but trusting. As they climbed out of the wash and headed north, keeping to the rough country where horses couldn't easily follow, Calder realized he'd crossed a line. He wasn't just helping anymore. He was committed. These men wouldn't stop hunting them, and the garrisons wouldn't forget. He'd spent 7 years running from his past, from duty, from the violence that had cost him everything. Now, somehow, he'd walked straight back into it. And this time, he wouldn't have the law to back him up. Just his wits, his rifle, and a frightened woman with secrets that powerful men would kill to protect. The locket at Eleanor's chest caught the sunlight as they walked, the bloodstains dark against the silver. Whatever proof she carried, whatever she'd seen, it was worth dying for. And Calder had just made the decision that it was worth fighting for too. Behind them, dust rose on the horizon. The hunters were still searching. And somewhere ahead, the town of Clarkston waited, controlled by men who believed themselves above justice. Calder didn't pray much anymore. But as he led Eleanor north into the wilderness, he found himself hoping that the man he used to be, the marshal who'd fought for what was right, was still somewhere inside him. Because that man was about to be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. They emerged from the mine shaft just before dawn. The eastern entrance was even more overgrown than the western one had been, hidden behind a curtain of wild roses and creeping vines. Calder pushed through first, checking to make sure they weren't walking into an ambush. The air was cold and clean, the sky beginning to lighten with the first hints of morning. Eleanor stumbled out behind him, Rex at her heels. She looked like she'd been through a war covered in dust, her dress torn, her face drawn with exhaustion. But she was alive, and that was something. "We need water," Calder said, scanning the landscape. They were on the eastern slope of the ridge now, looking down into a wide valley. In the distance, he could see the dark line of trees that usually meant a stream or river. They made their way down slowly, Eleanor leaning heavily on Calder's arm. Rex ranged ahead, his tail wagging now that they were out of the confining darkness. The dog seemed to sense they'd gained some breathing room. The stream, when they reached it, was narrow but clean, running over smooth stones. Eleanor knelt and drank deeply, then splashed water on her face. Calder did the same, the cold water shocking him into alertness. He filled his canteen, then helped Eleanor to a flat rock where she could sit in a patch of early sunlight. "Rest here," he said. "I'm going to scout around, make sure we're alone." She nodded, already closing her eyes. The warmth of the sun on her face seemed to give her some relief from the pain she'd been carrying. Calder moved in a wide circle around their position, Rex beside him. The valley appeared empty, no signs of riders or settlements. That was both good and bad. Good because they weren't in immediate danger, bad because they had no resources, no allies, and Eleanor needed medical attention he couldn't provide. When he returned to the stream, Eleanor was asleep, her head resting against the rock. He didn't wake her. Sleep was probably the best medicine she could get right now. Instead, he sat nearby, his rifle across his knees, and let his own exhaustion catch up with him for a moment. His mind drifted back to his wife, to Sarah. She'd been a schoolteacher, gentle and patient, everything he wasn't. She'd seen something in him worth loving, something he'd stopped seeing in himself after she died. She'd believed he was a good man, that the work he did mattered. He'd tried to live up to that belief, right up until it got her killed. Now here he was, years later, trying to protect another woman from men who believed themselves above the law. Some part of him recognized the pattern, the way he kept finding himself in the same situation despite his best efforts to avoid it. Maybe it was just who he was, a man who couldn't walk away from injustice, even when the smart thing would be to mind his own business. Or maybe he was just tired of running. Movement caught his eye, Rex's head had come up, ears perked, Calder tensed, bringing his rifle up. But then he heard it, a child's voice singing softly, off-key and innocent. A boy emerged from the trees downstream, maybe 11 or 12 years old, carrying a fishing pole. He was thin, dressed in worn clothes that had been mended multiple times. His feet were bare despite the cold morning. He stopped when he saw Calder, his eyes going wide. "Easy," Calder said, keeping his voice calm. "We're not going to hurt you." The boy looked ready to bolt, but Rex chose that moment to trot over, tail wagging. The dog had always been good with children, and the boy's fear softened into curiosity. He reached out tentatively to pet Rex's head. "What's his name?" the boy asked. "Rex. He's a good dog." The boy's eyes moved to Eleanor, still sleeping on the rock. "Is she sick?" "She's tired. We've been traveling." The boy nodded, as if this explained everything. "There's no town nearby. Not for 20 miles, anyway." "We know. We're just passing through." Calder studied the boy more carefully. "What about you? Where's your family?" The boy's expression closed off. "Gone." That one word carried a weight that Calder recognized. He'd heard it before, seen it in the eyes of too many frontier children who'd lost parents to disease, violence, or simple bad luck. "You living alone?" Calder asked. The boy shrugged. "I got a place. Used to be my folks' homestead, but it's just me now." "How long?" 3 months, I reckon. Maybe 4. The boy sat down on a rock near the stream, still petting Rex. Raiders came through. Said my pa owed them money for protection. Pa said we didn't need protecting, we just wanted to be left alone. They killed him. Killed my ma, too, when she tried to stop them. Calder felt his jaw tighten. The story was too familiar, too close to what Eleanor had described. These raiders, they have a name? They worked for the Garrison brothers. Least, that's what one of them said when he was laughing about it afterward. Eleanor stirred, waking at the sound of voices. She sat up slowly, one hand pressed to her chest. When she saw the boy, something in her expression changed, a mixture of sorrow and recognition. "Hello," she said gently. The boy stood, suddenly shy. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Eleanor asked. Thomas Mercer," Eleanor's face went pale. "Mercer, was your father named Samuel?" Thomas nodded, surprised. "You knew him?" "I knew of him." Eleanor's voice was tight with emotion. "He worked as a surveyor, didn't he?" "For the land office?" "Yes, ma'am. He measured out property lines, made maps and such." Eleanor looked at Calder, and he could see the pieces falling together in her mind. "Samuel Mercer worked with my husband," she said. "He was helping gather evidence about the garrison land fraud. He surveyed the actual property boundaries, proving that the garrisons had falsified their claims." "They killed him for it," Thomas said, matter-of-factly. "They made it look like raiders, but I know it was them. Pa told me he'd made powerful enemies by telling the truth about what he'd measured." Calder stood, his mind racing. "Thomas, did your father keep records, copies of his surveys?" "He kept everything in a strong box. Buried it before they came. Told me where to find it if anything happened to him." Thomas's expression hardened with a determination that looked wrong on such a young face. "I dug it up after. Been keeping it safe, waiting for someone who might know what to do with it." Eleanor pushed herself to her feet despite her exhaustion. "Thomas, those records could be crucial evidence. Combined with what I have, they might be enough to prove the full extent of the garrison crimes." "Then you can use them," Thomas said simply. "That's what Pa would have wanted." "It's dangerous," Calder warned. "The same men who killed your parents are hunting us. If they find out you're alive, that you have your father's records—" "They already know I'm alive," Thomas interrupted. "They came back looking for the strong box. Tore apart the house, searching for it. I hid in the root cellar, same place I hid when they killed Ma and Pa. They figured I'd run off or died. But I stayed. Couldn't leave Pa's work unfinished." Calder looked at Eleanor. Her eyes were bright with tears, but there was steel in her expression. They both knew what this meant: another person in danger, another target for the garrisons, but also another witness, another piece of evidence that could bring justice. "Show us," Eleanor said to Thomas. "Show us where your father's records are." Thomas nodded and started walking upstream. Calder and Eleanor followed, Rex trotting alongside the boy. As they walked, Thomas talked about his parents, about the life they'd built on their small homestead, about his father's belief that honesty mattered even when it cost you everything. Calder listened and realized they were building something here, not just a case against the garrisons, but a kind of makeshift family bound together by loss and the determination to see justice done. An old woman carrying her dead husband's evidence, a former lawman trying to redeem his past failures, and now a boy who'd lost everything but refused to let his father's truth be buried with him. It wasn't much to stand against the most powerful family in the territory, but sometimes, Calder thought, that's how real change started, with a handful of people who refused to look away, who chose to fight even when the odds were impossible. They reached the remains of the Mercer homestead. As the sun climbed higher, the house was a burned-out shell. The barn collapsed, but Thomas led them past the ruins to a stand of cottonwood trees near a small creek. "Here," he said, kneeling by the largest tree. He pushed aside some loose stones and started digging with his hands. After a few minutes, he pulled out a metal box, about the size of a large book covered in dirt. He opened it carefully. Inside were rolled papers, sealed documents, and a leather journal filled with his father's precise handwriting and detailed sketches. Eleanor took the journal reverently, turning pages with trembling hands. "This is incredible," she whispered. Samuel documented everything, every false boundary, every forged deed, every parcel of stolen land. Combined with William's evidence, this is irrefutable. "Then we have what we need," Calder said. "Now we just have to get it to someone who can act on it." "The territorial judge," Eleanor said. "The one my husband was working with before he died. If we can reach him—" "Where is he?" Calder asked. "Clarkston," Eleanor said quietly. "He's holding court there next week." Calder felt his stomach sink. Clarkston, the town controlled by the garrisons, where their influence ran deepest. Walking into Clarkston with this evidence would be like walking into a lion's den. But looking at Eleanor's determined face, at Thomas's hopeful expression, he knew there was no other choice. Justice wouldn't come to them. They'd have to take it to Justice's doorstep, no matter the risk. "All right," he said, "then that's where we go. But we do it smart, and we do it together." Thomas stood straighter. "I'm coming with you, Thomas," Eleanor started. "I'm coming," the boy said firmly. "It's my pa's work too. I got a right to see it finished." Calder looked at the boy and saw the same stubborn courage he'd seen in Eleanor. Some battles you couldn't fight alone. And maybe that was the point. Maybe standing together was what gave their cause meaning. "All right," he said. "You come with us. But you follow orders, and you stay close. Deal?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "Deal." And so they became three, an unlikely alliance against overwhelming odds. As they gathered what supplies they could from the ruined homestead and prepared for the dangerous journey to Clarkston, Calder found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Not a good chance, but a chance nonetheless. And sometimes that was enough. Thomas knew a route that would keep them away from the main trails. He led them through narrow valleys and along ridgelines where the timber grew thick enough to hide their passage. The boy moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent his whole life in this country, reading the land like others read books. They traveled slowly, mindful of Eleanor's weakening condition. She insisted she could keep up, but Calder could see the effort it took. Her breathing was labored, and she had to stop more frequently, to rest. The hand pressed to her chest had become a permanent fixture, as if she could somehow hold her failing heart together through will alone. By midday, they stopped in a grove of aspens to rest and eat. Thomas produced some dried fish from his pack, sharing it without being asked. The boy had learned to be self-sufficient in ways that made Calder's chest ache. No child should have to grow up that fast, that hard. "Tell me about your father," Eleanor said to Thomas as they ate. She'd been quiet most of the morning, conserving her strength, but now she seemed to need the distraction. Thomas's face brightened. "He was a good man. Taught me to read and write, how to track and hunt. He said education was the most important thing a person could have, that it made you free." "He was right about that," Eleanor said softly. "He used to say that truth was like the North Star. You could always find your way if you kept your eyes on it." Thomas pulled out his father's pocket watch, running his thumb over the engraved surface. "He gave me this the night before they came. Said if anything happened to him, I should hold on to it and remember that good men leave marks on the world, even if they don't live to see them." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Your father and my husband would have liked each other. They believed the same things." "Did your husband give you that?" Thomas asked, pointing to the locket at Eleanor's throat. She touched it, nodding. "On our wedding day. He said it would keep me close to his heart wherever duty took him." Her voice caught. "I've carried it every day since he died. Sometimes I forget it's there. Other times, it's the only thing keeping me going." Calder listened to them talk, feeling like an outsider looking in on something he'd lost the right to years ago. He'd had that once, someone who believed in him, who saw his work as meaningful, but he'd let bitterness and anger poison that memory, had spent 7 years running from both his failures and his successes. "Mr. Boone," Thomas said, pulling him from his thoughts. "Were you a marshal?" Calder glanced at Eleanor. She gave him a small, apologetic shrug. She must have mentioned it to the boy while Calder was scouting. "I was," he admitted. "Why'd you quit?" The question was direct, innocent in the way children's questions often were. They didn't understand yet that some topics were off-limits, that some wounds were too fresh to probe. "I made mistakes," Calder said carefully. "Let people down who were counting on me." "Did you mean to?" "No." "Then it wasn't really your fault, was it? I mean, if you didn't mean to." Calder looked at the boy, at his earnest face and simple logic. "It's more complicated than that." "Grown-ups always say that," Thomas said, "but sometimes I think they just make things more complicated than they need to be." Eleanor laughed softly, the sound surprising all of them. "You know, Thomas, you might be the wisest one among us." They rested a while longer, letting the sun warm them. Rex lay beside Thomas, who absently scratched the dog's ears. For a brief moment, they could have been any family on any journey, without danger behind them or uncertainty ahead. But the moment couldn't last. They were packing up when Rex's head snapped up, a growl rumbling in his chest. Calder had his rifle in hand before the sound fully registered. He moved to the edge of the trees, scanning the valley below. Riders. At least 6 of them, moving in a search pattern across the landscape. They were too far away to identify, but Calder didn't need to see their faces. He knew who they were working for. "They're persistent," Eleanor said quietly, moving up beside him. "They know what's at stake." Calder studied the riders' pattern. They were methodical, checking every grove of trees, every possible hiding spot. Eventually, they'd work their way up to this ridge. "We need to keep moving," Thomas said. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles north. It's well hidden, built into the side of a canyon. We could hole up there, wait for them to pass. Or we could keep pushing toward Clarkston," Calder said. "Every hour we delay is another hour for the garrisons to prepare, to hide evidence, to intimidate witnesses." "Every hour is also another hour for me to rest," Eleanor said practically. "I won't lie to you, Mr. Boone. I'm not sure I can make it to Clarkston without stopping for more than a few minutes at a time. My heart—" She paused, pressing her hand to her chest again. "It's not strong. The stress, the running, it's taking its toll." Calder looked at her, really looked, and saw what she'd been trying to hide. The grey pallor of her skin, the tremor in her hands, the way her breathing seemed to require conscious effort. She was dying by inches, and the journey was accelerating the process. "The cabin, then," he decided. "We rest, let Eleanor recover some strength, and figure out how to get past those riders." Thomas led them north, moving carefully to stay under cover. The riders continued their search below, unaware that their quarry was slipping away above them. By late afternoon, they reached the canyon Thomas had mentioned. The cabin was barely visible, built into an overhang of rock and covered with years of accumulated brush. Someone had chosen the location carefully. It commanded a view of the approaches while remaining nearly invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Inside, the cabin was small but dry. A stone fireplace sat against the back wall, and rough bunks lined the sides. It smelled of old smoke and leather, but it was shelter, and that was all that mattered. Eleanor collapsed onto one of the bunks as soon as they were inside. Calder could see the relief in her face as the burden of movement was lifted, if only temporarily. "Rest," he told her. "I'll keep watch." "Mr. Boone," she said as he turned to leave, "thank you for everything. I know this isn't what you bargained for when you stopped to help a stranger on the trail." "No," he agreed, "it isn't. But I'm seeing it through." Why? He considered the question. Why was he risking his life for people he barely knew? Why was he walking back into the same kind of fight that had cost him everything years ago? "Because you were right," he said finally, "about good men leaving marks. I spent 7 years trying to erase mine. Maybe it's time I made some new ones." Eleanor smiled, her eyes already closing with exhaustion. "William would have liked you." Calder stepped outside, leaving her to rest. Thomas was gathering wood for a fire, a small one that wouldn't give away their position but would provide warmth as the temperature dropped. Rex sat nearby, alert and watchful. Night was falling, painting the canyon walls in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere out there, the garrison's men were still searching. But here, in this hidden place, Calder felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. It wasn't redemption. He wasn't fool enough to think one good deed could erase years of failure. But it was a start. A chance to prove that the man he'd been, the one who'd believed in justice and fought for the innocent, wasn't completely dead. As Thomas started the small fire and Eleanor rested inside, Calder stood watch over them both. 3 lives bound together by circumstance and choice, by loss and hope, by the belief that truth mattered even when the cost was high. The darkness gathered, but for the first time in years, Calder wasn't afraid of what it might bring. He was ready. The morning brought a change in Eleanor that Calder had been dreading. She woke, gasping, her hand clutched to her chest, her face ashen. He helped her sit up, but she waved him away weakly. "I'm all right," she said, though clearly she wasn't. "Just need a moment." Thomas brought water, his young face creased with worry. Eleanor drank slowly, each swallow seeming to require effort. When she finally caught her breath, she looked at Calder with eyes that knew the truth they'd both been avoiding. "It's getting worse," she said simply. "We can stay here another day," Calder offered. "Let you rest more." She shook her head. "Time is running out, Mr. Boone, not just for me, but for all of us. The territorial judge, Judge Harrison, is scheduled to hold court in Clarkston starting tomorrow. If we don't reach him by then, he'll leave, and it could be months before he returns. The garrisons will use that time to destroy evidence, silence witnesses, consolidate their power. We have to move today. Not if it kills you. I'm dying anyway." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "My heart has been weak for years. The doctors told me I had time left, but not much. I knew that when I went to work for the garrisons, I knew I might not survive to see justice done. But at least I can get the evidence into the right hands." Thomas knelt beside her. "Mrs. Pritchard, you can't give up." She touched his face gently. "I'm not giving up, dear boy. I'm simply being realistic about my limitations. But that's why it's so important that you two survive. The evidence must reach Judge Harrison, whether I'm there to testify or not." Calder felt something tighten in his chest. He'd lost Sarah because he'd been too focused on the mission, too convinced that duty came before everything else. Now he was watching another woman sacrifice herself for justice, and every instinct screamed at him to prevent it. "There has to be another way," he said. "There isn't." Eleanor reached into her dress and pulled out a sealed envelope. The paper was yellowed with age, the wax seal bearing an official territorial stamp. "I need to tell you both something. The truth about who I am and what this evidence really means." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I told you I worked as a housekeeper for the garrisons, that I infiltrated their household after my husband died. That's true, but there's more." He broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter inside. His eyes scanned the formal language, the official letterhead, and then stopped on a paragraph that made his blood run cold. "This is from the territorial governor," he said slowly. "Yes, written 3 months before my husband died." Eleanor's voice was steady now, strengthened by purpose. William wasn't just investigating the garrisons as a judge. He'd been appointed by the governor as a special prosecutor with extraordinary powers. The governor suspected corruption ran deep in the territory, that local law enforcement couldn't be trusted. William's mission was to gather evidence against the garrisons and anyone else involved in the land fraud conspiracy, then present it to a new territorial judge, someone from outside, someone who couldn't be bought. Calder looked up from the letter. "Judge Harrison." Yes, Harrison was appointed specifically to hear William's case. The governor wanted someone with no local ties, no debts to the powerful families. The letter you're holding authorizes any legal witness to present William's evidence if he was unable to do so himself. It essentially deputizes whoever carries it to act on behalf of the territorial government. "Why didn't you lead with this?" Calder asked. "This changes everything. With this letter, I become an even bigger target," Eleanor interrupted. "The garrisons don't just want to silence a witness. If they knew I carried the governor's authorization, they'd understand that killing me wouldn't be enough. They'd have to destroy the evidence and eliminate anyone who'd seen it. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to put that burden on you." Thomas was reading over Calder's shoulder. "But this means we can testify even if Mrs. Pritchard can't. The judge has to listen to us." "In theory," Eleanor said, "but there's a..." Complication. The letter requires that I appear before Judge Harrison in person to transfer authority. If I die before reaching him, the authorization dies with me. The evidence could still be presented, but it would have much less legal weight. The garrison's lawyers would tear it apart, claim it was obtained illegally, fabricated, anything to cast doubt. Calder felt the weight of understanding settle over him. This wasn't just about getting evidence to a judge. It was about Eleanor herself, her presence, her testimony, her legal authority as the widow of Judge Pritchard and holder of the governor's mandate. Without her, they had documents and stories. With her, they had an ironclad case that the garrisons couldn't wiggle out of. "Then we make sure you get there," he said. Eleanor smiled sadly. "That's the other thing I need to tell you. I've been lying about how sick I am. Not making it seem worse, making it seem better." She pressed her hand to her chest again. "My heart isn't just weak, it's failing. The doctors gave me 3 months, maybe 4. That was 6 months ago." The cabin fell silent. Even Rex seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, pressing close to Thomas. "Every day is borrowed time now," Eleanor continued. "The exertion, the stress, the running, it's accelerating the inevitable. I feel it, Mr. Boone. The way my heart skips beats, the way it races and then slows. I've seen enough death to recognize its approach." "There has to be something we can do," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "There is," Eleanor said firmly. "You can help me reach Clarkston. Help me stand before Judge Harrison and transfer this authority legally and properly. Then, whatever happens to me, the work continues. Justice continues." She pulled out another item from her dress, a leather-bound journal, similar to the one Thomas's father had kept, but older, more worn. "This is William's testament. Every case he investigated, every crime he documented, every corruption he uncovered. Combined with Samuel's surveys and the documents I took from the garrisons, this represents years of work. Dozens of families displaced, at least 20 murders, fraud totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. The garrisons aren't just criminals, they're the head of a criminal enterprise that reaches into every level of territorial government." Calder took the journal reverently. The weight of it seemed to represent more than just paper and ink. It represented lives destroyed, justice delayed, and the dying wishes of 2 people who'd sacrificed everything for truth. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said. She was getting weaker now, the effort of confession taking its toll. "Samuel Mercer didn't just survey land, he was William's key witness. He'd agreed to testify about the fraudulent boundaries, to explain how the garrisons had systematically altered property lines to steal land. His death wasn't random violence, it was a targeted assassination ordered by Luther, Garrison himself." Thomas's face went hard. "I knew it. Your father was a hero, Thomas. He knew the risks and chose truth anyway, just as my husband did, just as I'm doing now. And just as both of you must do if I don't survive the journey." "You'll survive," Calder said, but even he could hear the doubt in his voice. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. "Promise me something, both of you. If I die before we reach Clarkston, you'll complete the mission. You'll find a way to get this evidence to Judge Harrison. You'll make sure William's work, Samuel's work, my work, that it all means something." "We promise," Thomas said immediately. Calder looked at the boy, at Eleanor's desperate, hopeful face, at the documents that represented so much pain and sacrifice. He thought about Sarah, about his own failures, about the 7 years he'd spent running from duty and consequence. "I promise," he said. Eleanor sagged with relief. "Thank you, both of you." She lay back on the bunk, suddenly looking frail and ancient. "Now help me up. We have 15 miles to cover, and I intend to walk every step of them." Calder helped her stand. She swayed but found her balance, determination overriding her body's protests. Thomas gathered the precious documents, securing them in a waterproof bag. Rex watched them all, his tail wagging slowly, as if he understood they were preparing for something important. They stepped out of the cabin into the morning light. The canyon walls rose around them, casting long shadows. Somewhere ahead, Clarkston waited a town controlled by the very men they sought to bring to justice. Somewhere behind them, hunters prowled, searching for the witnesses who threatened their master's empire. But Calder felt something he hadn't felt in years, a clarity of purpose that transcended fear. This was bigger than revenge or redemption. This was about standing up when everyone else had sat down, about fighting when surrender would be easier. Eleanor took his arm, and they began walking. Thomas fell into step beside them, carrying his father's legacy. Rex trotted ahead, scouting the way. 3 souls and a dog, walking toward justice or death, or perhaps both. But walking nonetheless, because some things were worth dying for, and if you were lucky, they were also worth living for. The journey to Clarkston had truly begun, and whatever waited at the end, they would face it together. They made it 5 miles before Eleanor collapsed. One moment she was walking, leaning heavily on Calder but still moving forward. The next, her legs simply gave out. Calder caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her gently to the sparse grass beside the trail. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I just need a moment." But Calder could see it was more than that. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and her skin felt cold and clammy under his hands. He'd seen enough death to recognize its harbingers. "Thomas, water," he said urgently. The boy was already there, canteen open, helping Eleanor drink small sips. She managed a few swallows before pushing it away weakly. "How much farther?" she asked. 10 miles, Calder said. He didn't sugarcoat it. She deserved the truth. Eleanor closed her eyes. "I won't make it. Not walking. Then we'll find another way." Calder looked around. They were in open country now, the land rolling away in gentle swells. No cover, no shelter, and increasingly, no options. The sun was climbing toward its zenith, and in the distance he could see the faint smudge that marked Clarkston's location. "We could build a litter," Thomas suggested. "Drag her on poles." "Too slow," Calder said, "and it would leave an obvious trail." "Then what?" Thomas's voice cracked with frustration and fear. Before Calder could answer, Rex started barking. The dog stood rigid, staring back the way they'd come. Calder grabbed his rifle and scanned the horizon. There, riders, at least 4 of them, closing fast. They'd been spotted. "We need to move," he said. "Now." "I can't," Eleanor whispered. "You have to." Calder pulled her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. They stumbled forward, but their pace was agonizingly slow. The riders were gaining, would overtake them within minutes. Calder's mind raced through possibilities, discarding each as quickly as it formed. They couldn't outrun mounted men. They couldn't hide in open country. They couldn't fight 4 armed riders when he was supporting a dying woman and protecting a child. Then he saw it, a dry wash cutting across the landscape about 200 yards ahead. Not much, but it offered some cover and a defensible position. It was their only chance. "There," he said, pointing. "We make a stand." They reached the wash, with seconds to spare. Calder half-carried Eleanor down the steep bank, Thomas scrambling behind them. The wash was about 6 feet deep, with crumbling dirt walls, carved by flash floods that rarely came anymore. Calder positioned Eleanor in a protected hollow, then checked his ammunition. He had maybe 20 rounds. Not enough for a sustained fight, but enough to make their attackers think twice. The riders appeared at the top of the wash. Calder recognized the lead man, the scarred tracker who'd pursued them before. The man pulled up his horse, signaling the others to spread out. "You've led us on quite a chase, Marshal Boone," the man called down. He'd done his homework, learned Calder's name and history. "But it's over now. Send the woman up, and we'll let you and the boy ride away." "We both know that's a lie," Calder called back. The scarred man shrugged. "Worth a try. But you're right, Mr. Garrison's orders were clear. No witnesses. I'm sorry about that. I got nothing personal against any of you. You're going to kill us anyway, and you're apologizing for it? Man's got to make a living. This just happens to be mine." There are better ways to earn money than murdering women and children. Maybe so, but none that pay as well. The scarred man gestured to his companions. They began to dismount, pulling rifles from their saddles. You can make this easy or hard. Either way, the outcome's the same. Calder glanced at Eleanor. She was conscious, but barely, her breathing shallow and rapid. Thomas crouched beside her, one hand on his father's pocket watch, the other clutching the bag with the documents. Rex pressed close to the boy, growling low. 4 men against 1, with a dying woman and a child to protect. Not good odds, not even close to good odds. But Calder had been in bad situations before. The key was to change the equation, to find a factor the enemy hadn't accounted for. "Thomas," he said quietly, "I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Take Rex and the documents. Work your way down the wash, staying low. About 100 yards that way. It bends north. Get around that bend and keep going. Don't stop. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you. You're not. You're completing the mission. If Mrs. Pritchard and I don't make it, those documents have to reach Judge Harrison. That's more important than any of us. Mr. Boone, that's an order, son. You promised Mrs. Pritchard you'd see this through. Well, now's when you keep that promise." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but Eleanor's weak voice stopped him. "He's right, Thomas. Go. Finish what our families started." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. He squeezed Eleanor's hand once, then crawled down the wash with Rex beside him. Within seconds, they disappeared around a curve in the bank. The scarred man was still talking, trying to negotiate or intimidate or simply run out the clock while his men positioned themselves. Calder used the time to shift his own position, finding a spot where the wash wall had collapsed, creating a natural firing step. "You know what's funny?" The scarred man called down. "We almost didn't find you. Would have ridden right past if your dog hadn't barked. Lucky for us, I guess." "Luck runs out," Calder said. "So does ammunition. How many rounds you got there, Marshal? 10? 20? We can wait you out all day. Then you'll miss the show in town. Judge Harrison arrives today, doesn't he? Your bosses will want you there, making sure no witnesses arrive to testify." The scarred man's expression changed slightly. He hadn't expected Calder to know about the judge's arrival. It meant the timeline was tighter than he'd thought. "All the more reason to finish this quick," the man said. He gestured to his companions. "Take him." The men opened fire. Bullets slammed into the dirt wall, sending showers of earth cascading down. Calder ducked, counted to 3, then rose and fired twice. One man went down clutching his shoulder. Not a kill shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. The others sought cover, their fire becoming more cautious. That was good. Caution meant time, and time meant Thomas was getting farther away. Calder moved to a new position, fired twice more. Another man cursed as a bullet clipped his leg. The odds were shifting, but not fast enough. He had maybe 12 rounds left. Eleanor stirred beside him. "Mr. Boone, stay down. Listen to me." She pulled him close with surprising strength. "In my left boot, there's a derringer. 2 shots. For emergencies." Calder felt along her boot and found the small pistol hidden there. 2 shots, not much, but it was 2 more than he'd had a moment ago. "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? I was saving it for myself, if they caught me." She met his eyes. "I wouldn't have let them take me alive. Couldn't risk what they might do to make me talk." Calder understood. She'd been prepared to end her own life rather than betray the mission. The thought made his chest tighten with respect and sadness. "Well, let's make sure it doesn't come to that," he said. More gunfire erupted. The men were advancing, using cover and suppressing fire to move closer. Professional tactics, executed well. Calder responded with carefully aimed shots, forcing them to stay low but knowing he was losing ground. Then he heard hoofbeats, approaching fast. More riders, at least 3 of them. Reinforcements for the garrison men. This was it then. The end of the line. Calder checked his ammunition. 8 rounds left in the rifle, 2 in the derringer. Not enough. Not nearly enough. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered. "I tried." Eleanor touched his arm. "You did more than try. You gave me something I thought I'd lost hope. Whatever happens now, know that it mattered. You mattered." The new riders crested the rise. Calder raised his rifle, prepared to sell his life dearly. Then he saw the badge on the lead rider's chest, glinting in the sunlight, and his heart nearly stopped. It was a U.S. Marshal's badge, and the man wearing it was someone Calder hadn't seen in 7 years, James Cordell, his old partner. The man who'd saved him from killing Jack Torrance with his bare hands, who'd helped him disappear into the mountains. The man Calder had thought he'd never see again. Cordell pulled up his horse, surveying the scene with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The 2 other riders with him wore badges too, deputy marshals, well-armed and alert. Cordell looked at the garrison men, then at Calder in the wash, and his weathered face split into a grim smile. "Well now," Cordell said, his voice carrying across the distance, "seems like we got here just in time." The scarred man looked between Cordell and Calder, calculations running behind his eyes. 3 federal marshals changed the equation significantly. "This is a private matter, Marshal," the scarred man said carefully. "Doesn't concern federal law." "That's so?" Cordell pulled out a piece of paper. "I got a writ here from Judge Harrison himself. Says there's been reports of witness intimidation in this territory. Says he's authorized federal intervention to protect anyone with testimony relevant to his court proceedings. You wouldn't be intimidating witnesses, would you?" The scarred man's hand drifted toward his gun. Cordell's deputies noticed, their own hands moving to their weapons. The tension stretched taut. "Walk away," Cordell said quietly. "Tell your boss the rules just changed. This is federal jurisdiction now." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the scarred man slowly lowered his hand. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Cordell said. "You just don't know it yet." The garrison men gathered their wounded and rode off, but not before the scarred man cast one last look at Calder, a look that promised this wasn't finished, not by a long shot. When they were gone, Cordell dismounted and walked to the edge of the wash. He looked down at Calder, and despite everything, he smiled. "Been a long time, Cade." "James." Calder couldn't believe it. "How did you find us?" "Got a message, tied to a dog's collar, believe it or not. Said there were witnesses headed to Clarkston who needed protection. Figured I'd better investigate." He glanced at Eleanor, taking in her condition. "This one of those witnesses? This is Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, widow of Judge William Pritchard." Cordell's eyebrows rose. "Well, hell. The territorial governor's been looking for her for months. There's rumors she died, that the garrisons got to her." "They tried," Eleanor said weakly. "Mr. Boone stopped them." "Did he now?" Cordell looked at Calder with something like pride. "Old habits die hard, don't they? Seems like, well, you picked a hell of a fight to come back for. The garrisons own half the territory. You know that, right?" "I'm learning," Cordell laughed, the sound carrying genuine warmth. "Still the same stubborn fool I remember. All right, let's get you folks to town. Mrs. Pritchard needs a doctor, and Judge Harrison needs to hear what you've got to say." With his deputy's help, they got Eleanor up and onto a horse, Calder supporting her. Thomas and Rex emerged from down the wash, the boy's face breaking into a relieved smile when he saw the marshals. "Is it over?" Thomas asked. "Not yet," Calder said. "But we're closer." As they rode toward Clarkston, Eleanor barely conscious between them, Calder felt the weight of completion approaching. They'd made it this far, through luck, determination, and sacrifice. Now came the final test, facing the garrisons on their own ground, in front of a judge who represented their last hope for justice. The town appeared on the horizon, its buildings stark against the afternoon sky. Somewhere in those streets, Luther and Cole Garrison waited, secure in their power. But that power was about to be tested. And Calder Boone, the man who'd run from his past for 7 years, was walking straight back into it with his eyes wide open and his purpose clear. Justice was coming to Clarkston. One way or another, bullets tore through the dining room, splintering wood and shattering glass. Calder kept Thomas pinned to the floor. Rex pressed close beside them. Cordell and his deputies returned fire through the broken windows, their shots measured and deliberate. "How many?" Harrison shouted from behind an overturned table. "At least a dozen," Cordell called back. "Maybe more. They've got us surrounded." The gunfire intensified. The garrisons were committed now, all pretense of legitimacy abandoned. They were trying to kill everyone in this room, a federal judge, U.S. marshals, witnesses. The audacity of it was staggering, but Calder understood the calculation. If they succeeded, they could claim it was rebels or bandits, manufacture evidence, buy their way out of consequences. And if they failed, they were finished anyway. This was a desperate gamble born of desperation. "We need to get the judge out of here," Calder said. "Can't," Cordell replied, firing twice more. "They've got every exit covered. We're pinned." A bullet struck the wall inches from Thomas's head. The boy didn't scream, didn't panic. Instead, he reached out and pulled the documents closer, protecting them with his body. Calder felt a surge of pride even in the midst of the chaos. Then he heard something that made his heart stop, Eleanor's voice, weak but clear, coming from the doorway. "Stop shooting." Everyone froze. Eleanor stood in the entrance to the dining room, supported by the doctor who looked terrified but determined. She was deathly pale, barely able to stand, but her eyes blazed with purpose. "Mrs. Pritchard, get down!" Cordell shouted, but Eleanor ignored him. She moved slowly to the broken window, the doctor supporting her every step. Outside, the gunfire had faltered, the garrison men uncertain what to make of this dying woman's appearance. "Luther Garrison," Eleanor called out, her voice surprisingly strong. "I know you're out there. I know you're directing this." A pause. Then a voice came from across the street, cold and refined. "Mrs. Pritchard, or should I say, the widow Pritchard. We wondered where you'd gone." Luther Garrison himself. Calder moved to the window carefully, catching a glimpse of the man. He was in his 50s, well-dressed, distinguished-looking. He could have been a banker or a senator. Nothing about his appearance suggested the monster he truly was. "You killed my husband," Eleanor said. "You killed Samuel Mercer. You've killed dozens of innocent people, stolen their land, destroyed their lives. And you did it all while pretending to be a pillar of the community. Careful with your accusations, Mrs. Pritchard. Slander is a serious offense. Is it slander when I have proof?" She gestured back into the room. "Judge Pritchard's complete investigation. Samuel Mercer's accurate surveys. Every forged deed, every falsified document, every bribed official. It's all here, Luther. Every crime you've ever committed. Then, I suppose I'll have to make sure none of it reaches the court." "You're too late." Eleanor smiled, and in that moment she looked triumphant despite her dying body. "Judge Harrison has already seen it. He knows everything. And even if you kill everyone in this building, the territorial governor has copies. My husband was thorough. He knew men like you would stop at nothing. It was a bluff. Calder was almost certain it was a bluff. But it was a good one, delivered with such conviction that even he almost believed it. Luther's voice came back, and for the first time there was uncertainty in it. "You're lying." "Am I?" Eleanor swayed, and the doctor tightened his grip on her. "Are you willing to bet your empire on it? Because if you pull those triggers, if you kill a federal judge and U.S. marshals, there's no coming back from that. The territorial governor will send the army. You'll hang, Luther. You and your brother both." The silence stretched out. Calder could feel the balance shifting, could sense Luther running the calculations. The gamble had been to eliminate the witnesses before the evidence could be presented officially. But if the governor already had copies, If the case could proceed even without Eleanor's testimony, then murder would only ensure their conviction. Judge Harrison rose slowly from behind his table, brushing glass from his coat. He walked to the window beside Eleanor, his presence adding weight to her words. "Mr. Garrison," Harrison said, his voice carrying the full authority of territorial law, "I am officially informing you that I have received evidence of systematic criminal enterprise. I am issuing warrants for your arrest and your brother's arrest on charges of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. You can surrender peacefully, or you can resist and face additional charges. Those are your only options." Another long pause. Then Luther's voice came back, tight with barely controlled rage. "This isn't over." "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "It is." The garrison men began to withdraw, slowly at first, then more quickly as the reality of their situation sank in. They'd gambled everything on one bold stroke, and it had failed. Now they faced the full weight of the law. Cordell and his deputies moved to the doors, weapons ready, ensuring the retreat was genuine. Through the broken window, Calder watched Luther Garrison stand alone in the street for a moment, his empire crumbling around him. Then he too turned and walked away. Eleanor's legs gave out. The doctor and Calder caught her, lowering her gently to a chair. Her face was grey, her breathing shallow. "Did we win?" she whispered. "We won," Calder said. She smiled, then her eyes closed. The doctor immediately began checking her pulse, his expression grave. "She's alive," he said. "Barely. But I need to get her back to my office. Now." They carried her carefully through the hotel, out into the street where townspeople were emerging from their homes, drawn by the gunfire. Calder saw faces full of fear, confusion, and something else. Hope. Maybe hope that the garrison's reign was finally ending. At the doctor's office, they laid Eleanor on the same table as before. The doctor worked frantically, but Calder could see the truth in his eyes. She'd spent everything she had left in that final confrontation. "Mr. Boone," Eleanor breathed, reaching for his hand. He took it, kneeling beside her. Thomas stood on the other side, tears streaming down his face, but silent. "You did it," Calder said. "You brought them down." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us." She looked at Thomas. "Your father would be so proud." "I won't forget him," Thomas said. "Or you." "I know." Eleanor's grip weakened. "William's journal. Make sure it's entered as evidence. Make sure every family gets their land back. Make sure." Her words trailed off. Her breathing slowed. And then peacefully, like someone finally setting down a burden they'd carried too long, Eleanor Pritchard died. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the doctor's clock. Calder closed her eyes gently, his throat tight with emotion. She'd given everything for justice, had fought until her last breath to see the truth prevail. And she'd won. Outside, through the window, Calder could see Cordell's deputies leading Luther and Cole Garrison toward the jail in chains. The most powerful men in the territory, brought low by a dying widow, a murdered surveyor's son, and a hermit who'd thought his days of fighting for justice were over. "She was a hero," Thomas said quietly. "Yes," Calder agreed. "She was." They stood vigil over her body as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow there would be trials and testimony, land restoration and healing. Tomorrow justice would be served in open court. But tonight they mourned a woman who'd proven that courage wasn't about strength or youth. It was about standing up when everyone else sat down, about fighting for what was right, even when the cost was everything. Eleanor Pritchard had paid that cost, and in doing so, she'd changed everything. 3 weeks later, Calder stood in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Clarkston. The morning was clear and cool, the kind of day that made the frontier look almost gentle. Beside him stood Thomas, holding his father's pocket watch. Rex sat at their feet, patient and watchful as always. They were standing before 2 new headstones, placed side by side. The left one read, "Judge William Pritchard." He stood for justice. The right one read, "Eleanor Pritchard, She stood for justice when others looked away. "It's a good epitaph," Thomas said quietly. "It is," Calder agreed. She'd have liked it. Below, the town was stirring to life, but it was a different town now than it had been 3 weeks ago. The Garrison Ranch had been seized by territorial authorities. Luther and Cole Garrison were awaiting trial, facing charges that would almost certainly result in hanging. There, hired guns had scattered, some arrested, others fled. Judge Harrison had worked swiftly, validating every piece of evidence, issuing orders to restore stolen land to its rightful owners. Families who'd been displaced were returning. New deeds were being recorded, this time honestly. The corruption that had poisoned the territory for years was being excised, slowly but surely. Thomas had testified for 3 days straight, explaining his father's surveys with the clarity of someone who'd listened carefully to every lesson. The boy's courage had impressed everyone, even the defense lawyers who'd tried to discredit him. You couldn't discredit truth when it was documented so meticulously. Calder had testified too, explaining how he'd come to help Eleanor, what he'd witnessed, what she'd told him. It had felt strange to stand in a courtroom again after 7 years, to be on the side of the law instead of running from it. But Marshal Cordell had been there, lending credibility to Calder's testimony, vouching for his character. Afterward, Cordell had made him an offer. "Come back," he'd said. "The territory needs good marshals, men who understand that the badge means something, that justice isn't just for the rich and powerful." Calder had thought about it. Part of him wanted to say yes, to reclaim the life he'd abandoned. But another part, the part that had learned something these past weeks, knew that wasn't his path anymore. "I'm done wearing a badge," he'd told Cordell. "But I'm not done helping people. I'll just do it my own way." Cordell had nodded, understanding. "The offer stands if you change your mind. In the meantime, I could use someone I trust keeping an eye on this part of the territory. Someone who knows the land, knows the people, unofficial-like. They'd shaken on it. Calder would remain in the area, a civilian advisor to the marshals, helping where he could without the weight of official authority. It felt right, like he'd found a balance between duty and freedom. Thomas stirred beside him, pulling him back to the present. "What happens now?" the boy asked. "To me, I mean. What do you want to happen?" "I want to rebuild my family's ranch, work the land like Pa did, but I'm only 12. Can't do it alone." Calder had been expecting this conversation. "You won't have to do it alone." Thomas looked up at him hopefully. "You'll help me?" "I'll do more than help. If you want, I'll partner with you. We'll rebuild the ranch together. You can teach me about surveying and proper ranching. I'll teach you about hunting and surviving up in the high country. Fair?" The boy's face broke into the first genuine smile Calder had seen from him in weeks. Fair. They stood in comfortable silence for a while longer, paying their respects to the dead. Then they walked down the hill together, Rex trotting ahead. In town, people nodded to them as they passed. Some stopped to shake Calder's hand, to thank him for what he'd done. He accepted the gratitude awkwardly, still not comfortable being seen as a hero. He'd just done what needed doing, nothing more. They stopped at the general store to buy supplies for the ranch. While Thomas picked out tools and seed, Calder found himself looking at a small leather journal, similar to the one Judge Pritchard had kept. On impulse, he bought it. That evening, back at Thomas's ranch, their ranch now, Calder opened the journal to the first page. He thought for a long moment about what to write, about how to capture everything that had happened. Finally, he put pen to paper. Sometimes, the most important moments in our lives start with the simplest choices. I chose to stop for a stranger on a trail, and that choice led me here to a purpose I thought I'd lost forever. Eleanor Pritchard taught me that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what's right, despite the fear. She stood against powerful men with nothing but truth and determination, and she won. This is her story, but it's also mine, and Thomas's, and anyone else who believes that justice matters more than power. He paused, thinking about Sarah, about all the years he'd spent running from his grief and guilt. Then he continued writing, "I've learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing, every day, to be better than you were, to help when you can, to stand up when others sit down, to remember that every act of courage, no matter how small, creates ripples that spread farther than we can see." He wrote late into the night, documenting everything, the journey, the danger, the sacrifices. When he finally set down his pen, he felt lighter somehow, as if the act of recording it had given it permanence and meaning. Thomas was asleep in the next room, exhausted from a day of hard work, clearing the burned timbers and planning the rebuild. Rex lay beside the boy, guardian and companion. Through the window, Calder could see the stars bright and clear, the same stars that had guided them through the mountains during their desperate flight. They'd made it. Against all odds, through danger and doubt, they'd made it to the other side. Eleanor's sacrifice had toppled an empire of corruption. Thomas would rebuild his family's legacy on honest ground. And Calder had found his way back to purpose, to believing that one person's choices could matter. The next morning, a rider appeared on the trail, the same trail where this story had begun. But this time, when the traveler stopped and called out for help, multiple people from the town rode out to assist. The stranger was welcomed, given food and shelter, helped on their way without payment or obligation. Calder watched from his porch and smiled. Eleanor's legacy wasn't just the land she'd restored or the criminals she'd brought to justice. It was bigger than that. She'd reminded an entire community what it meant to help strangers, to stand up for what was right, to choose courage over comfort. That evening, as Calder and Thomas sat on the porch watching the sun set over their land that was finally, legally theirs, Thomas asked a question. "Do you think Mrs. Pritchard would be proud of us?" Calder thought about the woman who'd asked him for one simple thing, take me to town, and had changed his life forever. "I think she'd be proud of all of us," he said, "not for what we accomplished, but for trying, for standing up when it would have been easier to walk away." Thomas nodded, satisfied. They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded and the stars emerged, one by one, eternal and bright. The frontier was still hard, still dangerous, still unforgiving. But it was also full of possibility, of second chances, of people who chose every day to be better than their circumstances demanded. And sometimes, Calder thought, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.